You may remember him, though, as, I don't know, maybe being Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, George Burns, and a whole host of people. And he's recently come out with a cool book called People I've Known and Been, Little by Little. Rich, thanks for joining us today, and just a pleasure to talk to you in person.
Well, thank you, Ken. Thank you very much for calling.
Yeah. Now, I know, you and I, we're getting older. In fact, I remember years ago, watching you on television and laughing because, you and I, we were sharing that moment when, was it Abraham Lincoln was giving his Gettysburg Address or something? We go way back.
Uh-huh. I didn't do any impressions of Abraham Lincoln.
No, I know, we're not that old. But you have done almost all the presidents for quite some time.
Yeah, I do about 7 presidents, yeah. But I'm kind of known as the guy that imitates the presidents. And some of them are easy to do and some of them are tough, and they're all different, too. We've had such a variety of personalities as president over the years. It's incredible, You go from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan, and now we got Trump, and it's really an incredible time to imitate politicians, and the country is so political right now too.
Yeah, but I understand that one of the presidents that you not only imitated but became fairly close with recently died, and that was, of course, George H.W. Bush.
Right. Yeah, he was a wonderful man and a great sense of humor. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first time I did him in front of him, I was doing my George Bush. Okay, gotta be prudent. Okay, read my lips. I didn't say no more taxes. I said no more Texas. and when I finished doing the impression, he looked at me and he said, "Rich, I think you should stick to Reagan."
Well, actually, I know in People I've Known and Been that one of the people you do write about is, of course, Mr. Bush. And I gathered just from the way, as I read that chapter, and I just reread it today to remind myself, because I knew we'd be talking, that you actually, the first time you tried to imitate him, you blew it. Yeah, well, you hadn't really even practiced. You hadn't even thought of it, because after all, who imitates vice presidents? And,
right.
Yeah. I thought you had a great line in the book there about it. After all, don't they just go out for the coffee? What a great way to define the vice presidency.
Yeah, well, Reagan introduced me to George Bush when he was vice president, and we went down to his office, and he did an impression of Gary Hart for me. I can't believe this, but he actually did. And Gary Hart was in the news back then, and I still remember him doing a kind of sort of an impression of Gary Hart, which I thought was kind of interesting. A guy like George Bush doing impressions, but Reagan loved to do impressions too. He was always doing Jimmy Stewart for me and John Wayne, and one time Reagan did an impression of Truman Capote for me.
Oh God, I love it. Just look.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that he was doing that, and he said to me, "Rich, I love to do Truman, but I don't have a joke to tell." And I said, well, I'll give you one. He said, really? I said, yeah, I'll give you a line you can use. Oh, that's great. Wait till I write this down. And he said, what is it? And I said, well, my name is Truman Capote, and a lot of people think that I wrote in cold blood, but that's not true. Actually, I wrote in ink. And Reagan just roared at that. He wrote that down. I don't know whether he ever used it or not, but he said to me, I'm going to try that out on Gorbachev. Could you imagine President Reagan doing an impression of Truman Capote for Gorbachev? Boy, I'd given a year's salary to see that, I'll tell you. That would have been interesting.
I think maybe that's the kind of personal connection that helped end the Cold War and bring down the wall.
Yeah.
I think
Reagan. Yeah.
One of the
Reagan
things
had a wonderful sense of.
Yeah. One of the things about your act, and over the years I've seen you, many times on television, never in person, unfortunately, but one of the things that always struck me was that if you were imitating people so that they really could see themselves in you, that it did make a very real connection. What you did, impressions make connection. And I'd always, one of the stories in your book, I think it was it George Burns, who used to say, well, if you're George Burns, who am I, kind of thing?
Yeah. He used to say to me, Rich, I think you do me better than I do. He said, I think you should go around being George Burns. They could probably get you cheaper. He was a wonderful man, George Burns. I love George Burns. He lived to be 100, and I remember on his 90th birthday, he was telling me about Sophie Tucker and Al Jolson and all these wonderful people that are long gone. And I thought to myself, boy, I'm telling you, when he goes, a whole era is going to go with him, because he lived such a long life, and he was such a nice man. I remember one time I interviewed him, and he said to me when I finished the interview, he said, listen, Rich, if you don't like it, I'll do it again. Can you imagine?
Yep.
Doing the whole interview again?
Yes, I can, because I did get to see him live once, and he just exuded the kind of warmth you're talking about. Wonderful, wonderful man. Of course, you have...
Well, there are certain people in show business that people like. I mean, apart from their talent, they like them. And George Burns was likable. Carol Channing was likable. Louis Armstrong, Jimmy Durante. Those people were very likable. Jimmy Stewart, as well as having the talent. The public liked them as personalities, and when you have that, Perry Como had that too, and you just warmed up to them immediately when you met them. Reagan, a typical example, and that's really something when you have somebody that is talented, but also you really like them and you admire them so much. Just it's incredible when I think of all the people that I've known and been, and that's what I wrote about in my book. People I've known and been, and funny stories about a lot of funny people, and the book is doing quite well, actually.
I would hope so. I've read it.
Yeah.
It deserves it. One of the things about it, though, you didn't mention one of the people who I think is very likable, at least in the way they come across in the book, is this guy named Rich Little.
Well, I hope I'm likable. I don't know. I try to be, but I don't know. I've never been cruel in doing an impression. I don't I do what Alec Baldwin does, and do as Trump and and try and make a political point by being cruel. I've never done that with anybody, and I think it's better if actors stay out of politics. I think they hurt themselves by showing whether they're a liberal or a conservative, and I think they hurt themselves a lot because they lose half their audience. So when you think about Johnny Carson, Johnny Carson, you never knew exactly what he was. A liberal or a conservative. Johnny Carson just pokes fun at everybody.
Yes, he did. By the way,
and that's great.
By the way, folks, if you haven't picked up on it yet, one of the things that made Rich Little famous as an impersonator was his ability to switch from character to character to character. It's just amazing. Just taking part in this interview with you, Rich, I'm like, wait a minute, who am I talking to now?
Yeah, well, I've always wanted to do voices quickly, without turning around, and then most of the impersonators before me turned around and then came back as the person.
Right.
But I wanted to do them fast and with no time in between. I mean, I could be doing Jimmy Stewart, and then I do George Burns, and then I do Jack Benny, and then I do Johnny Carson, and then I do Ronald Reagan and George Bush. Just do them quickly.
Wow, that's fantastic. I mean, you just blew me away, man. I gotta tell you. Hey, you're still performing, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm at the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas, and I've been there for 3 years, and I do a show 4 nights a week, Sunday to Wednesday, at the Laugh Factory in Tropicana, and I'm just having a ball. We're drawing great crowds, and it's just wonderful for me. I don't have to travel anymore much. I just go down and do my show and come home, and it's great. Having a wonderful time doing my show.
Wow. Do you try and keep up? Like, are you doing impersonations of, I don't know. Bernie Sanders and all these, or Trump, or all these the new figures.
Well, I don't know whether Bernie Sanders is a new figure, but I'll put him in the drawer with Spiro Agnew.
Yeah, okay. But
I try to keep up to date, what's going on, and put current events in my show, and trying to always bring it up to date. But primarily, I appeal to an older crowd that grew up with me and know who Johnny Carson is, and right. Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby and all these people, because young people have no idea who they are, So I do appeal to an older crowd.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, and of every entertainer, as they get older, their fans come along with them, and the grandchildren kind of don't know who you were. But
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I had a 15-year-old boy in the show the other night sitting in the front row, and he was laughing his head off, and I thought, he doesn't know anybody I'm doing. Well, how come he's laughing so hard? And when the show was over, I went up to him and I said, you seem to enjoy my show. And he said, oh, Mr. Little, you're very funny, but I was confused. And I said, you were confused about what? He said, I was just wondering when you were doing your show why you were changing your voice all the time.
Which does bring up something about it isn't just that you do impersonations. You actually have humor, and I think that comes across in your book.
And I sometimes think if the person doesn't know who I'm doing, if they're too young, hopefully they'll enjoy the humor. And
Right.
because there are young people out there who don't even know who Reagan is. They don't know who Bill Clinton is.
Mm-hmm.
They live in their own world with their laptops and their phones, and they don't really know what's going on. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. And then there are those of us who kind of remember, but in a few more years we may not know either.
Well, that's true. You think that Frank Sinatra is still fairly popular because his music was so great,
Mm-hmm.
but there will come a time when people will say, "Who's that?" You know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's true. Look at Busby; he's almost totally forgotten. And Bing was probably the greatest entertainer of the 20th century. There's no question of that. I mean,
Yeah.
the man, he recorded what is it, 100 million records or something like that. It's amazing, isn't it?
Oh,
But
yeah.
Bing is only remembered at Christmas time, really,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
nobody realizes what a great star he was.
Oh, he was a wonderful crooner. You have, in this book, one of the things you have done, I think that beyond talking about these people, you have chronicled a chunk of American entertainment that really is just and politics, but that is just marvelous. You've captured a period, I would say, pretty much from the 50s up through about the 90s. You kind of captured so many of the icons of that period. And
Yeah, well, we don't have them anymore.
yeah. Well, I wonder.
They're all gone, really.
I wonder if there's somebody waiting in the wings to become the Rich Little of, say, the next decade. Do you know of any great new young impersonators, or are you the last of an incredible skill?
Well, there's a guy named Gordie Brown performing in Vegas, and he's pretty good. He's a Canadian, and I put him in a show called Copycats when he first came to the U.S. His name is Gordie Brown, and he's absolutely brilliant. If you come to Vegas, try and catch him. I think he's performing at Hooters of all places, but he's very, very good, very excellent. But there's not as many impersonators now as there were 30 years ago. Not nearly as many,
Yeah, like a lot of those skills, they just seem to have disappeared. Partly, I guess, because people are not going to clubs as much, and things like that, where people kind of got started. How did you get started?
What?
How did you get started doing it, impersonating people?
Oh, I started imitating teachers, actually. That's how I started, and got such a good reaction doing the teacher. And then they never asked me a question again in class, because I would answer them in their voice, usually the wrong answer. And but that's how I started, imitating teachers. And then I went to local politicians, and then I started to do movie stars and television performers, and I worked my way up. I got on the Judy Garland show in 1964. And that brought me to the U.S. from Canada, and I just did a lot of television back in the 70s. There was a lot of variety shows on the air, and I did a show in almost every week, a variety show almost every week, and it was just a great time for me, And we had such great people to imitate back then too. So I came along at the right time. I was very lucky.
And I guess you had the right teachers, too. Teachers that were good to imitate.
Yeah. Right, yeah. I remember I went down to do the Copacabana in New York City, my first big engagement in the U.S., and all my teachers came down to see me do them.
Wow.
And, of course, I wasn't going to I wasn't going to do my teachers from school for an American audience. And they got upset and they went back to Canada and they were very annoyed. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So tell me, if you were to pick your favorite imitation to do, because it's the one that gives you the most pleasure as a person, no matter how famous or infamous or whatever the person is, who would be the person you most enjoy, just as a personal thing, imitating?
Oh, probably Reagan would be my favorite. He's great to do voice-wise and physically too.
Uh-huh.
And he was such a wonderful man with such a great sense of humor. He once said to me, he said, Rich, I think you do me better than I do. You do me so well. I was thinking when I pass away, they should bury you.
Okay. And who in the world do you wish you had been able, but is there anybody that you never, either because you couldn't get enough contact with them or whatever, somebody you wanted to imitate, but you never were able to master them?
Oh, yeah. Well, Angelique Jolie, I wanted to do her very badly, and then I'd never be lonely. I'd end up jumping myself. No, there are a lot of people that I wish I could do. I mean, there's a lot of movie stars that are tough to do. You can't do Brad Pitt, and you can't do George Clooney and Matt Damon, and there's a lot of current movie stars that are pretty well impossible to do. They're good actors,
Mm-hmm.
but they just don't have voices that are that distinctive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tougher to be an impersonator today than it was 30 or 40 years ago,
Yeah.
because back then, Gable and Humphrey Bogart and Clark Gable and John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, they were all easy to do because they were larger than life.
Yeah,
and always the same in every movie too.
Yeah, that always the same. I mean, that was what the public wanted. That was what the directors wanted. And of course, as you point out now, the best of the movie stars today are very different. They're trying to play the role. So,
oh yeah, playing different parts.
Yeah,
and being different people. Yeah, but Gable was always Gable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even when he did Gone with the Wind, he didn't have a Southern accent.
Mm-hmm.
He just played it as Gable. They very seldom, the older stars, changed their personalities. They were always pretty much the same in every movie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not true today.
No. Nowadays, that would not sell. That would not sell at all, except for one, Jackie Chan.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
yeah, true.
Yeah. Well, are you going to write a sequel? I mean, is this your only book, or are you going to do another one?
No, I don't think I'll do another one. People I've known and been. I don't know. I could write another book and call it "People I Have Not Known and Never Been."
You could.
That'd be one page.
Oh, folks, this is a book. I just want to remind you, it is available in like bookstores and online. It's by Rich Little, our guest today. It's titled "People I've Known and Been, Little by Little." It's got a lot of, as you may have already picked up from the interview, got a lot of humor to it. Got a lot of reminiscence to it. It's a very personal book, and it's a personable book. And
thank you,
Rich. I want to ask you, as we go out here, we close the interview. Is there anything else you'd like our audience to remember about you or the book that I haven't covered?
No, I just hope people remember me as a person who imitated people because I liked them, and admired them, and I wasn't cruel, and that's and bring back memories of some of the greatest stars of all time, and keep their names alive. I mean, that's basically, take them down memory lane, and have them forget their problems for a couple hours, and enjoy all these wonderful stars that are no longer living, and that's the great enjoyment I get out of performing.
Now, I have to tell you, before we stop, I want to share with you my favorite thing in this book. Okay, my one favorite chapter. And that's because I consider Orson Welles one of the great, if most eccentric geniuses of the performing arts of my lifetime.
Right.
And folks, I'm going to tell you, if you only bought this book to read the chapter about Orson Welles, I would say to you it's worth buying.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I worked on a movie with him that I never finished, and I think it came out recently, but it was very hard to figure out what the plot was, but it was a wonderful experience for me, even though I didn't finish the movie. It was a wonderful experience working with him because he was such an interesting man, and truly a genius, and with a great sense of humor. And I had a wonderful time in the 3 weeks I spent working on that movie. It was called The Other Side of the Wind.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, it blew away for me. But I think Peter Bogdanovich took my part over, and he finished the movie. But I have great memories about that film and working with Orson.
Yeah, and it's those kind of little gems that fill this book. You get a real, you don't just get to know Rich Little, folks. You also get to know these gems about people. It makes the people that you watched on the silver screen and the little screen and on giving political speeches, it makes them so much more real. It's fun. People I've known and been, little by little, by Rich Little. And Rich, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for calling me. Great talking to you, and enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Have a great day. And next time I'm in Vegas, I'm going to make it to the Tropicana to see you live.
Well, great. Tell me you're out there, and I'll do the show for you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.